Good afternoon, all. I can start. Okay, let's start. Good afternoon again. I'm Lucia Goracci. I'm a journalist in RAI, the Italian public radio and television. And I'm very pleased to be here at the Fondazione Invernizzi in Milan, joined by Professor Banerjee, Abhijit Banerjee. He's very renowned for dedicating almost all his life in finding new methods, let's say experimental methods to fight poverty. And for this, together with his wife, Esther Duflo, and with Professor Michael Kremer, they are both economists. They have been awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009. 19. Welcome. I'm very pleased to be here. Benvenuto. And obviously, we have almost 1 hour to discuss and share several of his ideas, suggestions, activities to fight against underdevelopment. But first of all, let me give the floor to President Giuseppe Bertoni, President of the Fondazione Invernizzi. Welcome in the podium. Please.
Thank you. And good evening to everybody. I will read my short speech because my English is not good enough. So it's a great pleasure that I am about to greet and thank all those who have joined this meeting of Invernizzi Foundation. But with no less pleasure, I thank Professor Banerjee, who for many years has been my point of reference for rural development activity in low-income countries. We had a short talk before the start. In fact, in 2012, in my faculty, University Cattolica in Piacenza, began a project called Production of Appropriate Food, Sufficient, Safe and Sustainable, funded by the Invernizzi Foundation that I have to thank again. And the main objective of this, of my activity was knowing to change. Before we have to know what we can later change. Therefore, very helpful to know the low-income country situation was a sentence from Banerjee and Duflo in Poor Economics and Radical Rethinking of the Way to Fight Global Poverty, published in 2011, as before. The sentence was, but many of these failures have less to do with some grand conspiracy of the elite to maintain their hold on the economy and more have to do with some avoidable flaw in detailed design of policies and with 3 ubiquitous I's: ignorance, ideology, and inertia. You can understand that a similar sentence from a scientist coming from India, so that he had the opportunity to know very well the situation of these countries was, at least for me, very, very important. So, according to this, our first help to this population was the attempt to change their mentality, particularly to overtake ideology and inertia. of the current farmers, of the people who are farmers at the present time. And on the other side, one of the biggest attention is for the third eye, which is ignorance. And so it is for many people particularly important, and in fact it is, the school. But as I told before to Professor Banerjee, the problem of the school and of educated people that we have to reach as much as possible is that nobody of them will return to the farm, to the rural activity, so it will remain completely outside the agricultural system. For this reason, I ask Mrs. Goracci to remember at the end or in some part of the Banerjee speech if he is still convinced of the opportunity of the sentence that I read before, and how he suggests that it will be possible to overtake this problem. Thank you for your attention, and again,
thank you. I have a personal experience about school because I was in Swat, in Pakistan, in Mingora, which is the city where was born Malala Yousafzai, another Nobel for Peace, the youngest, and she was in Great Britain because the Taliban attacked her, and while she was in hospital, she risked her life. I made a documentary on the schoolmates of Malala, and all of them, children, girls, fighting for their right to study, to be educated, they told me, and they were very aware of this, that education is on the base of freedom, individual freedom, and on democracy, because... Anyway, let's start, Professor Banerjee, from the very beginning. I'd like to ask you, how did you decide to dedicate your research, your work, perhaps a great part of your life, to the target to fight underdevelopment and poverty, if there has been in your life any turning point on personal experience that inspired you?
You know, I grew up next to a very large slum. And when I mean I grew up next to it, I don't mean I grew up 1 kilometer from it. We were the last house before the slum started. So I think what that does for, I think, anyone is sort of make it very clear that, you know, life is a lot about, you know, you know, how you get started. You know, these children, and I was for a long time very jealous of them. They didn't go to school. They played all day, which seemed better to me. Especially I hated my school, so it was particularly clear that it was the right thing to do. But you could sort of, once you look back on it, you see that it's not, I mean, they were lively, they were fun, they were interesting to listen to, they were energetic, and you sort of, from that point, it was very clear that in the economic system that they lived in and I lived in, they would have no chance. And this seemed to me to be such a palpable fact that, you know, that there is a gross unfairness inside most economic systems, but especially economic systems in developing countries, that is hard to hard to set aside when you're an economist. So I didn't particularly set out to be a development economist at all. Largely because I'm not particularly brave. And when I was a student, it was not what people studied. It was development economics was considered to be a dead field. It had all been solved already by great men who were, and no, not really women, only men, who had already solved all the problems of development. So there was nothing to worry about, and we just had to do very large computer models on the computer, and then it will tell us the answer to what to do. And that sounds so infinitely boring that I never studied development economics. I have, for the last 30 years or more, taught development economics without ever having studied it personally. But the reason I got there is that once you study something, you start to realize that there must be a way to connect it to this very obvious life problem that you encountered, and it's hard to forget it. So it's not, I don't think I'm particularly original or creative in doing that. It was just kind of an obvious trajectory.
It's original and creative, the way, the methods, the evidence-based methods. I've read about these randomized controlled trials that are mentioned in a Nobel motivation. Can you elaborate a little bit? How do they work?
So I think the idea of randomized controlled trials is very familiar. It's what we do in any experiment. In any experiment, you want to keep everything else controlled. And a very simple and credible way to do it is to randomly assign the treatment. That's what they do in lab trials. And so I think what makes randomized controlled trials in the social sciences different is that unlike in a lab treatment, it's not a matter of getting people to come to the lab every morning and putting a pill in their mouth. There's no pill that you can put in their mouth. There's no mouth waiting for it. So you are always trying to solve the core problem of how do I do an experiment where I don't control what people do. Economics is about creating opportunities. It's about, you can create a program in a school, but you can't plant the information inside the brains of the children. If the program works, it will go inside their brains. Maybe some of them will be paying attention, others won't. So therefore, that changes the entire structure of the experiment. The fact that you don't have control makes the experimental protocol very different from that of a medical trial. A medical trial, you have infinitely more control. So that's sort of what it is. And then that means, for example, that if you want to study the effect of a policy that changes the way payments are organized, for example, government makes payments, those things, you can't change them at the level of individuals. So we have randomized trials, which there were 11 million people in that. Not a medical trial has 70 people sometimes. We had 11 million people. The treatment and the control group together had 11 million people. It's just an order of magnitude different as a management question. It's an entirely different, it's very management intensive. You have to think about the practicalities of things, how you would implement it, how would you measure the effects. So it's both like a medical trial and entirely and vastly different.
What kind of suggestions did they give to you? What was the first new surprising result?
So, let me work backward. So, mostly I want to say that what I think was our success, the success of the Abdul Latif Jamil Poverty Action Lab, which is what we set up, is that we didn't try to do it all by ourselves. We have more than 1,000 researchers who are affiliates of the lab. They do the research, we take the credit. So it's a very good deal. But it's really one thing. Again, going back to what I said, a minute ago, one thing that's very clear is that if you want to do this, you want to do these experiments at that scale and implement them on the ground. You can't do much if you're doing it alone. It has to be 1,000 people. We work in 90 countries. We have 1,000 professors at Bocconi, for example, professor at different universities. They do the experiments. All we do in the Poverty Action Lab is maybe fundraise for doing the experiments, and we report the results of the experiment. So it's not particularly my work I'll go back and forth between talking about my work and other work. But I'll start with my surprise. So,
finish. I haven't.
Yeah, my surprise was I sort of absolutely knew that if you increase the number of teachers per student, education will improve. That was our first experiment. Mm-hmm. And it didn't. It had no effect. And I literally didn't believe it. So I said, okay, it must be about measurement. I must be not measuring it right. So I spent 1.5 years learning a vast field called educational measurement, which exists in education schools. I spent learning it. I went back and did many more tests, and I found that the first answer was correct. So that was my first. It was a very illuminating experiment. You learn something. And I don't mean you only learn negative things. Many of the things we've learned are very positive, but this was the first one. It was very, very illuminating because I assumed that the answer is surely that this will be a good thing.
I'm curious, just to give, in order to give us the length, the order of length of the experiments, can you give us some example? I mean, it takes generation, it takes year, I presume.
Depends on the experiment. So if you're trying to influence the take-up of vaccines, you could do it in 3 months. The outcome is not whether the children get measles or not. The outcome is whether they get vaccinated or not. And that experiment you could do pretty fast. If you want to follow, do you want to look at what happens to the children of people who get, women who go to university or not university, high school instead of not going to high school? Do their children grow up healthier? Do they grow up with better, skills? That obviously takes a long time. Hopefully they don't have children in high school. So you have to wait. It depends on the question. You can find questions where you can have an answer relatively quickly in 3 months or 2 months. And I have done those. And ones where you really can't get the answer for a very long time.
It's an interesting point because my experience suggests that women, even in the most remote areas of the world, they are very sensitive. For example, in vaccination, even the less educated women, they understand that they have to do something for the health of the children. I remember Afghanistan, for example. There was a sort of ideological negative approach, for example, from a Taliban culture, Taliban controlled areas against vaccination, but women kept going, and some people even risked their life to give the possibility, to give the chance, even in the most remote areas. In your latest book, Chuk, it's correct pronunciation, on food economics and society, you describe the process of forming of wishes, desires, preferences. That's just very interesting, and I want to ask you an anecdote that you mentioned there about your difficulty while you were a child with vanilla and the solution of this problem apparently during a trip in Italy.
Yeah. So my father, when he was a student, worked in an ice cream factory in England in the 1950s. And in those, at that time, they used to make vanilla ice cream with synthetic vanilla. And my father took an intense disliking to vanilla, the vanilla flavor. After working there for 6 months, he refused to have vanilla. So we never had vanilla ice cream at home. And I grew up with this idea that vanilla was something to be avoided. And then I remember being in Milan. No, I don't remember where. Somewhere, I think in Milan, but maybe in Florence, one of the two. And somebody telling me, you should really try this. And it was affogato. And it was with vanilla ice cream. And I was hesitant. But that converted me to avocado for the rest of my life.
And you mean that the wishes can be culturally controlled, or?
And yes, I think many of the things that we think are delicious or even beautiful or good are come from particular ways in which our home cultures, our local cultures. It's partly about just looking. I mean, I think partly the vanilla problem is the problem of there is a particular smell of vanilla which synthetic vanilla imitates. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't give, vanilla actually has a bitter. And if synthetic vanilla doesn't have it, it gives it a much more complex taste than synthetic vanilla. And so part of the experience of, and that's the experience of art, is the experience of, in India, I'll say this, it might sound a little bragging, but I think even very poor people are very conscious of fabrics. People dress much more imaginatively. I say this in Milan, and I will say it in Milan, knowing that it sounds wrong. But people are much more, very poor people will wear something that in the colors, in the way the colors are matched, will be much more creative. And it's a matter of setting your eyes. It's about a matter of seeing with those two things, they can actually go together. So cultures are often about exposing you to specific fine distinctions that other cultures just ignore. That's a blue. No, that's a green blue. That's a turquoise. That's a Prussian blue. And the fact that you are trained to look at blues as a whole spectrum, which then you mix, that's a particular. It's a cultural training. And it could in other ways. My grandfather, for example, he used to call green blue. I was always impressed by this. He could not tell the difference. But it was not because everybody can see the difference between blue and green. Colorblind people can't see the difference between certain colors, but blue and green are distinguishable by everybody. He was not colorblind. But for him, culturally, those were called the same thing. So it's so much about reading of any kind is a lot about being asked to make distinctions. And the distinctions we make, that in India we're trained to make distinctions between different spices. In the US, we get this completely, I think in my view, awful thing called Indian food, which is mostly what you do, what you eat when you want to show your girlfriend that you are really macho. So you take her there and you choose the one with the six red chilies next to it, and you eat it, and she's impressed. That's not about the taste of food. And I cook a lot, and I absolutely don't feel that the making it spicier is a value. You can make spicy, but if you want to make spicy, you need to know why you're making it spicy. If you want to make it, give it a specific set of flavors, you need to think. Cooking is a lot about visualizing the taste in your mind. And it's about sort of thinking this combination is going to go well with that thing. And that particular thing is, again, about training. It's about the opposite of the six red chilies. It's about knowing distinctions. Its cultures are about emphasizing certain distinctions. American culture, as I was saying, doesn't emphasize a distinction between different types of spices. It emphasizes, I'm more macho, so I can have 6 chilies and you can only have 4. So those are different distinctions, even if you don't valorize one over the other.
You know, food is a good example because we need it for survival, but also we like to share, to celebrate the happiness to be together. So I would like to ask you if there is a universal moment when poor people pass from the basic needs to the pleasure, to the idea to invest, to the idea to keep something for the future, or to invest for the future.
So I would have said maybe slightly differently. I think most poor people are very aware of the space of pleasure. I think it's we kind of economists who sort of think of them and imply that somehow they're too poor to afford pleasure. But in fact, pleasure is critical, in my view, in giving people the impetus to want to live. If you tell them that, it's all delayed gratification. Right now you're poor, you should have bananas and boiled eggs for the next 10 years, then you will have enough money, and then you'll be able to have some pleasure. I don't think they would find life worth living. I think most people, and it's not just about their own pleasure, it's also about giving pleasure. So you go in India, one of the things that I've done many surveys, and one of the things that I always dread during a survey is that you go to a people's house and they will say, you must have tea. And these are people, that this is costly for them. And they tell you, you must have tea. And that part, I like tea. But then what they're going to do is they're going to take out the extra stash of sugar and make the tea infinitely sweet, really to the point where I really don't like it. But and yet you can't refuse it. You want to appreciate, because sugar is expensive. It's a treat. It's something that they kept for themselves, but it's even nicer to honor a guest with it. So giving pleasure is also important. It's not just about pleasuring your tongue, it's about pleasuring everybody.
You cannot imagine how much tea I drank to cross the checkpoints towards the front line in my life.
I can imagine, exactly. And it is important because...
Definitely. Again, in the book, you mention a buffet at a high-level reception as a metaphor for, let's say, a goodwill philanthropy, but with almost no effect. Do you have any suggestions on a way, a method, some rules to make philanthropy, let's say, result-oriented?
So I think that it has become more reasonable. So philanthropy, when I first encountered it, was extraordinarily clearly driven by the will of the people, its leaders. What does that mean? It means they have a hunch, or they have an intuition, or they have an ideology, and they will, based on that, they have an idea of what is the right thing to do, and they will, and there might be multiple people, so one of them likes this, one of them likes that, and you just do that. I think what has changed, and part of the effort of the Poverty Action Lab is to change exactly that, which is to provide the idea that some of those things you may want to do it, but trust me, there's no evidence that they work. Other things, they might work very well, better than you expect. So I think part of the cultural change that we have tried to engineer is exactly that, which is a change moving away from sort of hunch to, this is where the evidence is. It's not that we always need to do where the evidence is, because otherwise, of course, sometimes you want to do new things. You want to try things that nobody has tried, precisely for that reason, which is that maybe it's going to work. But when you do that, you want to be conscious that you're doing that. And in particular, you be conscious of the fact that as an experiment, it's valuable only if it is measured properly. If you don't measure it, you wasted your experiment. So the whole emphasis it's not that you have to do what everybody else, what the evidence said. Do something different. But if you do it, then do it with the mindset of measuring carefully.
Yeah. And involving the local actors is always
that's
very important.
That's another point, which is also true, which is that the other problem, and this is the problem in the sense that we tried to fight most with our book, Poor Economics, that he mentioned, is the idea, we were trying to fight the idea that, people make up stories about the poor or whoever they're trying to help, and that those stories are not necessarily founded in the lives of the people they're trying to help. So before you design your treatment, your intervention, your whatever you want to do, find out who they are. And I think that already is that seems obvious, but it's not at all what people, how it's done. So I think that's also something where there's been more, some improvement, because people have sort of learned that lesson that, sometimes you do things which you just never manage to connect to what people really wanted. And if they don't want it, it's not going to be very useful for them.
Let's now drill down into a series of questions related to current events. I would like to mention the recent deceased Pope Francis that's dedicated part of his mission to a very basic but fundamental concept that poverty is not unavoidable. I followed him in a trip in Madagascar, and I remember one of his speeches, very powerful. He said, poverty is not a fatality. That is elementary, but we have to remind ourselves. Why I mentioned Pope Francis? Because I remember that in one recent interview at Harvard, you said that the first 20 years in the 21st century, 2019, were quite positive, definitely positive for the world poorest. What about the second 20 years? Because sometimes I feel we live in the era of nonchalance.
I'm not a clairvoyant. I'm good at sometimes knowing what the past was. It's harder to know the future.
First of all, tell us why you consider the first 20 years not so bad.
I think global poverty went down actually massively. And it's not just that it went down in India and China. It went down everywhere. It went down in Africa. It went down in countries that were not growing. There was a very large expansion starting in about 2000 of conditional cash transfer policies, where people were just given small amounts of money for maybe taking their children for health checkups and things like that, and those helped reduce poverty. Poverty went down in Latin America, in Africa, and in Asia. Separately, you can take a look at it. So that's first. Second thing, infant mortality dropped massively. Partly here, I would say some of the credit goes to the work of some of my colleagues in the Poverty Action Lab. I think one very major source of child death was malaria. And the expansion of free insecticides-treated bed nets after 2010 was a massive contributor to the extremely dramatic fall in malaria deaths that happened after 2010. So that's one of the things that happens. Is there's also immunization, much more immunization. That's one of the other areas we worked on in the Poverty Action Lab. Many of us worked on it. So I think more immunization and less malaria deaths, and to be honest, and this was, more hospital births. All of those things happen at this time. Maternal mortality drops very, very substantially as well. So all of these, to me, the fact that poverty went down, infant mortality went down, and maternal mortality went down, that's a pretty good sign of a good period. I'm sure there were other things that were happening that were not so good, but at least these are very, very clear. And school participation, the other thing that changes is, and this is mostly in Africa, early 2000s, suddenly all over Africa, the primary schools used to be not free, and they become free. And as a result, primary school participation now across most countries is 95%. So those are all things that happened since 2000. So those are, to me, it was an obvious fact that it was a good time.
We didn't choose accidentally the year 2019 because then COVID came and...
Yes, it's not accidental, and COVID was a disaster for the poor, and with the economic shutdown, and they, in some places they just died in large numbers. So both of those were disastrous, but till 2019, it was a good time.
What about the current time? Because
I think the big, there are really two things that are happening right now that we have to keep our eyes on. One is climate change, which has been happening all through, but suddenly, because climate change in some ways is interestingly nonlinear, in the sense that if you look at the mortality, till the average daily temperature, and this average daily temperature is a confusing thing because you think of it as being, the daytime, but no, it's the day plus night temperature. Till it's 32 degrees, there's almost no mortality consequences. Now, that's not quite right because maybe they die in 10 years, but at least you don't see it. You start to see it climb past 32 degrees, you start to see people dying on those days. And now there's many more days above 32 degrees. That's the thing that's going up. So it's used to be in a country like in a city like Delhi, 5 days in a year, and that's heading towards 20 now. So that's a very big change, and that's going to kill a lot of people. So that's a very, I don't think there's any way to absolutely avoid that, because there's nothing you can really do in the short run about it. So that's one thing that's looming. The other thing that's less obvious, but I think also is that the population growth is happening in exactly the places where the resources are always been scarce, and the climate is getting worse very fast in Niger or in Nigeria, or and this is something on which, you know, that's going to be a very difficult force to manage as well. So I think we have two things that I feel are going to be, and in Pakistan, another country where its population is growing, climate is awful. You're getting these floods now every year, pretty much driven by climate change. So it's really, there are a bunch of countries where this is getting to be a new set of crises are going to emerge.
And this will new migration. So now it's time to talk about the elephant in the room, because we talked all the time during the lunch about Donald Trump. So I hope you appreciate that I kept him in the last part of the interview. Okay, what to mention? He closed the U.S. aid that gives a lot of people the opportunity to improve their life, with many programs that are not there anymore, and the commercial war, the tariffs that he introduced, the commercial war declared to China that answered. How I know that there is not a univocal answer, and it's difficult to answer, but what is the impact on the programs to fight poverty? What is the impact on the countries that were starting to, let's say, confine poverty to their unfortunate past?
So I think it's worth saying that aid in general is a very small part of the actual money that gets used to fight poverty. There's just not enough money. You know, there's just too many poor people, and you know, the amount of money is extremely small relative to what you would need to have. Now, there are countries where it is important, very poor countries like Sierra Leone and Liberia. Liberia is a US aid country, and these countries will be hurt. But a country size of Nigeria, you know, just the volume of the money that comes in is just small. So, yes, it's bad. Now, what is really bad is more that it's, and this is precisely what Trump has been particularly careful to try to kill, is that these are often programs targeted towards specific vulnerable groups within countries. So trans people or gay people, or one particular minority in a particular country. So there's a lot of these programs. I think the two things that I think are most importantly lost. One is just much more targeted things, which groups that were, whatever reason, the national government was not going to do anything about it. Mm-hmm. For example, I'll give you an example that, you know, there are, even now, with some of the money from USAID, some schools were being run for, high schools were being run in people's houses in Afghanistan. How were they being run? The Taliban was a little bit complicit in the sense that they kind of knew about it, but as long as it's not visible, they were willing to tolerate it. So there are these kinds of things which are much more targeted in a very specific way towards specific, very vulnerable groups. Those are things that we will lose because of USAID. Feeding programs in Sudan, I think actually they might actually restore them, but there's widespread starvation in Sudan. Year after year, drought plus civil war. There's just a lot of people were dying, will die. And it's a very complex negotiation where Save the Children, for example, which is has people there who negotiate with the government and the rebels to get food to pockets which are cut off. So these kinds of things are going to be hurt. So that's first point to make, is that think of it as, and it's important because if any of you here want to do something, then it's worth thinking about those vulnerable groups, the starving in Sudan. That's much more than, yes, you can't solve world poverty, but you can maybe help people, starving people in Sudan. That's, I think, first point. Second point is innovation. One of the parts of USAID that got shut down was Michael Kremer, who won the Nobel Prize with us, set up something called Development Innovation Ventures, DIV. It was within USAID, and it was a way to fund innovation either in the private sector or on government or in NGOs, by NGOs, of programs that help the poor and do careful measurement and show that these solutions exist. So innovation is something governments are bad at because it's taking a risk and you don't want to measure and show it fails. So it's often better to do it outside government. And DIV was a great success. There was huge demand for its money, and people were coming to it, private firms and NGOs, saying, okay, we are doing this program in Malawi, agriculture program. We're going to improve agriculture in Malawi, and here is our protocol for measurement, and we're going to show that does it improve or not. This kind of innovation is very hard to fund. It was a few $100 million for innovation, and that's gone. So it's smaller things, but things that are very well targeted. That's the big loss is that. And then there are specific things which maybe I'm hoping that even the U.S. politics will eventually relent, and which is the World Food Program and things like that. It's the helping the most vulnerable. That's the kind of thing where I think the losses will be.
It is great. You talked about innovation. I don't know if you want to say something about the reaction of the university, American University, to
yeah, but that's in some ways is less of
their independence.
Poverty issue than about I think what America's dominance in the world came from, in my view, from its extraordinarily successful university sector. The last 40 years, I think the American university system just went from being another great system to being the most successful university system in the world. And it was not true much less true in the 70s. Now is obviously true. And I think if I look at just next door to us at MIT, you have Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, any number of tech firms and any number of biotech firms. And what are they doing? They're harvesting what the students, the postdocs, the professors are producing in the university system. This is what made. That's why Silicon Valley is not in Silicon Valley because the weather is good. It's because it's next to Stanford and Berkeley, two of the greatest computer science schools in the world. It's not accidental. So they're really destroying their biggest single asset. So and they're doing it out of pique, nothing else. Trump knows that the most educated people don't like him, and I think for him it's enough that they don't like him. Then he wants to. It doesn't matter what consequences follow. His only goal is revenge against anybody who doesn't like him. So I think it's going to, in that sense, I think he's he's not even thinking about what the consequences are. These people, they are bad people. I'm going to punish them. So
and also the multipolar, the mobility of ideas, like...
those are, I think those are also...
They have so many spices, like in Indian food, in the American universities.
Exactly. He doesn't value any of that. Diversity of ideas, he doesn't value. But I think even more than that, it's even more small-minded than that. I don't think it's just, they don't like me, so I'm going to
hurt
them. It's as elemental as that.
Yeah. Ignorance, ideology, etc. You were talking about innovation. I will introduce another philosophical topic that is artificial intelligence. And I want to, did you see 2001 Space Odyssey, obviously? And I want to remind you that, amazing, I was in shock when I saw it, the scene of the astronaut Dave fighting with the computer that deviated his course, and at the end the man had to kill the computer. And Hal, the computer, kept asking him, don't do it, undo it, until the moment when it died. So artificial intelligence is a tool, but and for the moment we control it, but in the future, and I know that this time too there is not a univocal answer, how can they dialogue with the fights of the underdevelopment? How can be a tool to improve the fight against poverty?
So I think that I'm glad you didn't ask me about whether all the more abstract and philosophical concerns about AI, because I don't understand that. I am just not competent. On the much more practical, I think it's already, for example, one of the things that is relatively, I know people who are already using it and will use it much more, which is sort of think of a healthcare provider in rural India, okay, or doesn't matter, rural Kenya, two countries I know relatively well. It is really, you have no obvious way of testing people. You don't even, and then you don't have the skills either. So neither the skills nor the. Many of the people practicing healthcare have no degrees. They're just going by intuition. And one thing that is being offered to them is decision support. So take a photo, enter some questions on your phone, and upload it, and see what the AI says. And it's not that the AI has to be great. It's, you think about, we did a study where we sent what we call standardized patients to healthcare providers. This was done in Kenya, in India, in China. So, and 50% error rates in diagnosis is not uncommon. It's the, maybe 55 is the median correct across these places. Just people cannot diagnose simple things like heart attacks and diarrhea and things like that. So and treat them well. So the correct treatment, so it's not, we're not talking about whether AI is better than the best surgeon in Milan. We're talking about, is AI better than the practitioner without a medical degree in rural, in the Rift Valley in Kenya?
It can be very democratic.
Yeah, so in that sense, I think there is a lot of space for improvement. I don't think it's that hard. I also don't think that, if you look at the teaching in most schools, including my school, it was really extraordinarily boring. So again, using videos and then using AI to pick up what kids are not, what they don't understand. So you ask them a set of questions, you see, you can process that. All of this exists. I'm saying it just needs to be cheaper, more available, but you can process their answers and say, this child stopped understanding after Newton's second law or something, and therefore we need to go back there and bring him back. So all of that, the AI can flag where they're stopped. So there is a whole set of options that are already available, which are going to be, I think, if deployed, useful. So I think that's the positive view. Then there's all kinds of other, I think, bad things will happen. A lot of jobs will be lost. So I'm not particularly pro-AI, but I think if you want to look at the positive side, I think these are the positives.
Yeah, it can shorten distances,
Yes, exactly.
Physical and
Exactly.
technological, etc. I want to give the chance to the public to ask questions if they want, but just a personal curiosity, because you mentioned before that the underdevelopment is concentrated in areas where also they have climate problems, and unfortunately, underdevelopment and wars are very firmly linked, and there is this vicious tendency not to prolong in the time. A war is just a turning page between a conflict and another one. Did you have any personal experience in countries afflicted by wars? Positive personal experiences. Otherwise, I will give word.
No, I mean, I've been to both Liberia and Sierra Leone.
Oh, so.
But I would not say that there was, it felt like people were almost exhausted by the war. It felt like people were willing to move on, and I think the early 2015 or something, was still a period when people were quite happy to give an opportunity to move on. There was an exhaustion. Everybody mentioned the war, and everybody mentioned the fact that, okay, now we are moving on. But I don't know that I have any unless this is a question I should have asked you, and you could tell us much more about that experience. Maybe you can tell a little bit more.
In Sierra Leone, I've never been. I mean, I moved mainly in Middle East, but I remember that in Sierra Leone they had the great problem with the child soldiers that I hope they have started to solve. I want to ask you if you have any question. I think we have 10-15 minutes left, and I will be pleased to give you the opportunity to ask some questions, if you want.
Hi. So since COVID, a lot of the inequalities in the world became more obvious. So of course, those in, let's say, situations of job precarity, right? So jobs that were more, there was a possibility of suffering more from COVID. Since then, there has been a questioning on the inequality of the world. So the rich getting richer and the poor not developing at the same speed. What is your point of view when you come to developing economics in that sense? Do you see inequality between classes as a relevant factor in poverty levels staying high or not? And how would you understand this moment where in all countries in the world, there seems to be this conflict of the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer?
No, I would say, I mean, let me disagree with you on only one thing, which is that in some ways during COVID, in a number of countries, inequality went down during COVID because businesses shut down, etc. But inequality, and that's the striking fact, is that somewhere in almost all the countries I know data for, which is most countries in Western Europe, India, China, few other Asian countries, the US, Canada, you see that the inequality kept falling till between 1980 is the turnaround in many countries, and in Western Europe, you see a later turnaround, but 1990, let's say. And then it's been growing. It's nothing particular happened in 2019. It's been growing for the last 30 years. And I think it was a shift in the cultural acceptance of inequality. It was we were sold this idea. I think we should not have bought it, but that inequality is necessary for solving other economic problems. And the glorification of the billionaires. Right now, I open the press and the word billionaire comes out so often. It's somehow, what's so special about them? They got lucky in some particular way, but their opinions, the amount of money that they move around, Musk has, in a sense, become the icon of that, which is that he uses money for political purposes. He spent $250 million to get basically a job in the White House where he can now do whatever he wants and often benefit himself. There is a sense in which I think there's a question of poverty, but it is a question of the whole future of the world, in a sense, is at stake in that question of inequality. It's not just that. It's somehow we've been too tolerant of it. The 5 U.S. companies essentially are. If you look at Europe, has a merchandise manufacturing trade surplus with the U.S., which is roughly equal to the amount of money Europe pays 5 U.S. companies. Think of Apple, Facebook, Meta, Google. That's where all the money. These companies are too powerful, too big, And I don't understand why we're sitting there watching them. To be honest, the US is now taking them on. And Europe should take them on much more. These companies there's no business being that powerful.
I've been giving a look to this approach you decided to use into the study of poverty and underdevelopment. And I find very interesting, very fascinating that what is considered a pretty scientific approach is being used to study some more maybe isolated cases when it comes to the controlled randomized trials. But the point is, in my view, at least, that these are trials, and one thing are trials you can make in certain cases. One thing is to then try to fill the gap in order to implement what is being studied, what is being discovered to make effective policies and try to defeat underdevelopment. So my question is, what has been done till now? What are researchers doing now to fill the gap? Because I've seen that there is debate on that, and that many solutions and idea of solutions has been discussed till now.
I think you sound, I don't know based on what, much more pessimistic than I am. I must say on that, I feel that there is, nothing happens kind of, I think the idea that here is great idea invented by some whatever scientist or social scientist, and then the policymakers immediately implement it. That's obviously naive. Mm-hmm. Policymakers are busy; they don't pay attention so much to those things. But do you see a very substantial shift in the way policy is made? Yes, I mean, absolutely. I have the advantage of being old, so I know how policy was made in 1995. And you told people that you need evidence, they would say, you're crazy or what? And now everybody makes a gesture towards evidence. In fact, I would say the current problem, any of you are offended by my saying it, forgive me, is consulting firms. They come up, it's not that they also speak in the language of evidence, just bad evidence. They don't tell you that it's bad evidence, but they come and offer evidence that this is better than that. They have very much the same discourse as anyone else. So in a sense, I think the problem is not that evidence has not yet penetrated, but it has penetrated too well. Consulting firms abuse evidence right and left.
I think we have time for one more. If there are any. Otherwise, let me thank.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
For the privilege that he gave, he offered us sharing his knowledge, his vision, and also his positive view on the future. And thanks to the Fondazione Invernizzi that hosted us in this event. Thank you.
Thank you.